Good evening. Our Bothell Planning Commission meeting for Wednesday, November 18th is now called to order. Let the record show that we have everybody present and in attendance on the commission. Are there any non-agenda public comments? Everyone saw the agendas when you came in. Any non-agenda public comments? All right, seeing none. Are there any approval of minutes? It looks like no, not this time. Any new business? Nope. So that brings us to our public hearing. Procedurally, do we need a motion to open this, or?
No, the chair
just
can
turn it
just
over?
open the hearing.
All right, well, we are now opening the hearing. And is there a reports that presentation that you'd like to give us?
Yes, I'll start, and then Dave Boyd will follow on that.
Thank you.
As the commission is aware, this is the second public hearing on the Shelton View Neighborhood Activity Center, which is located in the Shelton View neighborhood area, basically 228th Street and Meridian Avenue. Now, just quick ground rules. We kind of talked about this a little bit before. You know, we're trying to offer an opportunity for everybody to participate in a non-judgmental manner. Everybody's opinion is valued here, and that's something that the commission has always stressed, and we always are trying to be respectful for others. And the idea is that way you don't, make demonstrations that make somebody intimidated or anything like that. Now, on the Shelton View Activity Center, this is not the final hearing. We're going to have at least 2 more hearings that are scheduled for December 9th and January 13th, 2016. And we may even have some other dates as necessary. So this is not your last opportunity to speak to the commission about these items. Now, at the October 14th, 2015 public hearing, the commission identified a desire to talk about some additional information that we had not had. And basically, I just want to remind everybody that we've already had some extensive public presentations and some testimony on this. But there were a few things that were identified that we wanted to have some more discussion about, including affordable housing. Now, ARCH, which is a regional coalition for housing, it's a coalition of east side and north end jurisdictions that basically work together to create affordable housing and to identify options and to help jurisdictions with their development of affordable housing plans. Now, they will be here this evening. Unfortunately, they had another conflict with this time frame, and they will be here tonight, and we will go to them as well because that's an important topic that we want to get a discussion on. Another item the commission identified that they'd like to have some more additional discussion is this concept of clustering. One of the provisions it has talked about, and primarily the MC Coast property this came up, is the commission was saying, okay, yeah, purchasing the property and those kind of things is great and wonderful, and we can look at that as an option. But if it doesn't happen, let's say that there's a situation where it just decides that in some way that property does develop, the concept is how that property develops. And I just want to remind everybody that right now it is zoned R9600, which is a detached single-family residential zone, and that does have some ability to develop on that type of property. Finally, the commission asked for a little bit more detail about some transportation impacts. One of the things we've done is that in the packet we've got some additional trip generation ideas for the commission to kind of look at and understand a little bit what kind of the different scenarios would be generated as far as trip generation. Now, this is a really 25,000 foot level kind of analysis. It's not in a lot of detail because one of the real significant things that happens with any transportation analysis is the flow, the direction that people go. Because let's say you're having, we're going to generate another 200 trips on this from this piece of property. Some of those trips go east, some go west, some north, south. So that flow analysis is something that we did not do at this point, primarily because it's pretty complex. I wanted to kind of talk a little bit and jump right into the clustering concept. And the concept behind clustering is to permit developments to reduce the development footprint, or the envelope, if you would, by clustering, reducing lot area and dimensions into a smaller area, thereby preserving open space areas without having to rezone. Currently, the Bothell Municipal Code contains a limited ability to allow clustering within detached single-family zones, such as the R9600 classification. That means that if the city wanted to have some clustering to preserve open space on some of these single-family residential zones, the option that has been considered is to go to an attached residential zone, like R5400A, R4000, R2800. Now, the issue with that is that you are increasing the density, the number of lot yield, or the amount of dwelling unit yields, which is an option that the Planning Commission said that they would want to explore further this idea of clustering because it doesn't involve a rezone. You have the same basic relative density. So that was an idea that the Planning Commission was really excited about looking at. Now, we have a lot of standard detached single-family residential subdivisions within the city, and this is kind of what we're talking about here. Of course, in red is the outline of the property, and within that area, the footprint is entirely roadways, lots, and houses. There's a couple of examples. Here's another one. This is the standard traditional detached single-family residential type of a development. However, the concept of clustering allows some different approaches, and we actually have some of those kind of developments within the city of Bothell. And namely, there's, anywhere from Dover Station, which is a detached single-family residential development, to the Canyon Ridge condominiums, which is just north of the MC Coast property, which is an attached residential development, or Regent Wood condos, which is again an attached residential development. And circled in within green is the development footprint. Circled in red is the actual property line. You can see that there are large areas of open space and trees and things of that nature preserved. Now, I went ahead and did some concept sketches on the MC Coast property because that's the one we're really kind of focusing on for this approach, but the same kind of concepts apply throughout. And basically what you do is you would take the property and you divide it into the 9,600 square foot and the 80-foot lot circle diameter. When provide public right-of-way and those kind of things, and you can see that a significant portion of the property would be developed. This is the current zoning classification for this property. Now I'm skipping over a whole huge process about evaluation of environmental impacts and those kind of things, but this is the type of development that occurs within our 9,600 square feet. And essentially what you're looking at here is you're looking at a layout that has about 48 lots. It could be 35, it could be 45. There's a lot of different options, but this is just what we kind of see in that situation. The concept behind clustering is you would allow a much smaller lot size, and basically what that does is that reduces the footprint necessary to accommodate those lots. And here you can see a central spine road, a couple cul-de-sacs with these relatively small lots. They're in the 3,000 to 3,500 square foot area, about 40-foot lot circles, so they're about 40 feet wide. That's what we're seeing a lot in our townhouse developments as well as our detached condominium developments, is around that 40-foot circle area. So that seemed to me that was a pretty good concept. What you can see here is that it preserves a lot of open space, the trees and the vegetation that we've been talking about preserving. Take that even further, and you can go to the concept that is basically on the Canyon Ridge condominium site, which is multiple dwelling units within a single building. And basically what I did is I took the same concept here and applied it to this property. Essentially, 5-unit residential structures placed along a central access road. And again, even more open space is preserved. So that's kind of what clustering could potentially do, and that's something that we're going to have a lot more discussion about because it's a fairly complex element to get into. There's a lot of good examples, in the state of Washington as well as throughout the nation that we can look at. And of course, our comprehensive plan supports a clustering concept. We actually have policies that say that we should investigate clustering. So these are all things that we can look at a little bit more detail as we go through this process. Now, one of the things I wanted to provide, I provided this in the Planning Commission packet, and that's basically the traffic impact. And I kind of want to talk a little bit about that, give a little bit of background on it, because that's something we haven't spent a lot of time speaking to yet. And essentially what the city does is we place our traffic impact level of services into corridors. And in this case, here's a corridor, the 228th Street corridor. To the right is, of course, the large map that shows the corridors that the city has: Bothell Everett Highway, Bothell Way, 228th, and 208th or Maltby Road way up here. And this is basically a diagram out of our comprehensive plan right now, figure TR3A, that basically shows where those corridors are. It also is interesting because it identifies what some of the intersections perform at. And you can see some of these intersections have got A's and B's and C's and E's and F's. And those basically are measurements of how well or not well that particular intersection is performing. There's also something identified as average daily trips, and that's basically the number of trips that each individual development produces throughout the course of the day. And the reason I included this screen is because this shows what our average daily trips are on different roadways within the city. Again, here's Meridian Avenue and here's 228th. You can see there's about 19,200 trips average per day going through that area. Now, what I did is that I also took the trip generation figures that were provided by the Public Works Department, who is the Transportation Division, and they gave me that, and it's in your packet as well. You can see what those numbers are. And I did it based upon the existing zoning configurations to identify what we might do there. And I applied the standard basic how many square feet you'd get per each individual type of a use, and came up with some numbers. And basically the idea is that during the PM peak hour, the existing is about 182 trips, and the weekly daily trip generation is about 2,300. What I did is I took zoning option A, and that's the one that's the most intense that we've had in the packet for discussion. We haven't spent a lot of time deciding which of those options are the best one for the city, but I want to take the most intense one so we get kind of like that worst case scenario kind of a concept so that nobody is surprised later on with saying, oh, well, I thought it was going to be less. Anyway, and so what I did the same thing. I applied our standard numbers crunching that we do for any of these kind of a projects. And basically I came up with about 1,800 additional weekday daily trips on the roadway system, about 225 PM peak hour trips. So that's basically what the trip generation there is. I don't want to go too much further because, again, we haven't done the exhausting analysis yet, and we aren't even sure which of these options we're going to go for. We're wide open as far as that goes. So I'm going to conclude my presentation at that point and open it up to commission questions or public testimony, whatever the commission so desires.
Thank you. Yeah, so what I'd like to do is first, if anyone on the commission has any immediate questions that you want to ask, this would be a great time to do it. And then what we'll do is we'll turn it over to and get public testimony. It is great to see so many people. We have a lot of meetings where it's just the crickets, so it's exciting to have a full house. We want to hear from everyone, so we'll do that. And then after the public's had a chance to say what's on your mind and what you've been working through, then we'll come back for the commission to continue to drill in deep and ask our questions. So anybody on the commission have something? Yeah.
Hi, Bruce. Thanks a lot. Great presentation. So I'd like to probe a little bit more on clustering.
Yep.
And so if you could pull up those particular slides. So as you're showing what a clustering scenario could look like, go to the next slide.
You betcha.
That one. And I know that this is just kind of an example right now, but would that be what we're looking at there? An R9600 zoning to get that, and is R9600 have a particular yield for a piece of property that then, with clustering overlaid on it, actually results in a greater density but also more open green space?
Well, I'm not sure yet, but here's how I'll respond. Essentially what I did is that right now, underneath our planned unit development process, we have a mechanism that has some minor amount of clustering. It's not very, very much. Essentially what happens is that an applicant is required to prepare a site plan showing how many lots he would get as a standard subdivision, and that gets a number, whether it's 48 or 50 or whatever it happens to be. In this case, on this side, I got 48 in this layout. That was the number I used throughout, except that for the attached one I did 50 because I had 5 unit numbers and it didn't work out. But the idea would be that that's exactly what I did here. That's a similar approach that we could investigate. We could investigate another mechanism for a calculation. Basically, it would say deduct certain portions of the site, what we do, which is public right-of-way, critical areas, critical area buffers, and then you divide it by 9,600. There's a lot of different options to look at for there. But the idea would be that there would have to be some mechanism that got you approximately the same number of lots that you would get with a 9600 just from the standpoint that the whole idea behind that is to have approximately the same number of lots, but in a much smaller configuration.
Okay, so I think your answer is that what we're looking at there, you did the math with an R9600 designation.
I did.
Came up with 48 lots. But if we were using clustering, this is what it might look like.
Yes, and that,
Okay.
and that's something we'd work on, but I think that would be the whole point to try and achieve.
Okay, because where I'm going with that is just this idea, if we put a clustering overlay on a piece of property, are we pretty sure of the outcome we're gonna get with that? And that's my question is how prescriptive is a clustering overlay on a piece of property?
Well, I've seen a lot of different examples. Some are fully optional, some are actually required that somebody does clustering. So there's a lot of different approaches we could certainly investigate.
Okay, any other cities that you're aware of that have a clustering in their code, and how has that worked?
Just about all of them. We're a somewhat unique city in that we don't have, most of the jurisdictions have an R9600, and then they have a minimum lot size of 5,000 or 3,500 or something like this. That's a more typical way that these developments or the jurisdictions implement that. And that's how they get some of those open space areas preserved that you see. Not all of them do. Some have got a little bit better, some have not do a little bit better. But just about all the jurisdictions around us have some form of this flexibility to reduce lot area.
Okay. Those are all the questions I have on clustering. I do have a question on transportation, but I'll hold on that if any of the other commissioners would like to probe any further on clustering. I don't.
Yeah, thanks, Bruce, for the presentation. I had a follow-up question. You touched on it a little bit, not directly related to the property we're looking here, but if this were a general provision across the city, would it be based on the lot size that your calculation for houses would be determined, or the net buildable area? So, I mean, if there's critical areas, would that be deducted out? If you had an acre lot, and let's say you have 4 houses that you could put on it in a typical development, half of it's in wetlands, could you put 4 houses in the half of the lot that we would develop, or would we be restricting to 2? Just
As yet to be determined, unfortunately. No, I'm not trying to be, funny there, but basically the idea is that we have a lot of different approaches that we can investigate. And I think that generally what the approach would be to try and come up with something that would have a fairly close equivalency, if you would, as if you had a standard type of a development application. And what I would imagine is that we would probably continue to deduct critical areas and critical area buffers and streets and right-of-ways from the net calculation, and then you'd basically divide it. Now, that's exactly what we do for our attached residential zones, where we have dwelling units instead of lots. And basically what you do is you deduct those areas from the gross site area, and then you have a figure, and you divide it by the underlying zoning, which is either 4,000, 2,800, or whatever it happens to be, and that's how you do that in that approach. Something like that could probably work here, but I think that what you would look at is that more than likely we'd continue to have some type of a deduction for, well, the features that you have identified.
Thank you, Bruce. I just have a couple quick comments about the clustering provision and maybe a couple questions too. You mentioned that a lot of the other jurisdictions currently have some sort of clustering provision. In my experience, it seems that, and I just want to make sure this is all out there, that typically if there's a clustering provision in a city's code, that they also offer some sort of density bonus, a moderate density bonus. What I've seen is between 10 and 25%, maybe something like that, and that's how developers are I guess enticed to use the clustering provisions to set that land aside, because I think the concern would be we're going to set all this land aside, build smaller lots, and therefore build houses that aren't worth as much on them. So that would be something that I just want to get out there that is fairly typical, and also point out that the plan unit development ordinance that the city of Oval has is very, very rarely used. And it's widely believed that the reason that it's not used is because it doesn't offer a density bonus. So if we're interested in creating these open spaces and looking at trying to preserve open space and make these developments look nicer like you've done in your sketches, I think we need to consider that needs to be part of the package as a consideration of some moderate density bonus. If it's a 50 lot plat, maybe they get 3 more lots or something like that. Instead of 50, they get 53. I really think that's important. And it's been done. There are many examples out there of where we've been able to keep a significant amount, over 50% of the site, in oftentimes in open space by doing that. So I just want to comment on that. Thank you.
Yeah, and actually, I'll respond real quickly in that. That's really true, is that there are quite a few jurisdictions that have bonus densities or bonus units, if you would, depend upon, there's a lot of different incentives they have. Anywhere, well, affordable housing is one they do, as well as, of course, extra preservation of open space. So yeah, there are a lot of those type of benefits and bonuses provided to developers in different jurisdictions.
All right, great. Oh,
If there's no other questions, transportation.
yeah.
Okay. So I can do a little bit more of this later, but I did want to probe a little bit on the transportation analysis.
I was
So,
afraid of that.
what was that?
Nothing. I was afraid of that.
Let's see. So the math that's on page 6 and 7, and basically table 3, that was in your presentation. You said that was kind of a worst case analysis. By worst meaning, this is the what would probably produce the most additional trips.
Yes, that
Is
was.
that correct?
Yeah, exactly, yes.
Okay. I'm going just a comment, and then I don't really have a question, but just more of a comment. But I like your feedback on my comment, and that is that PM peak hour generation. And I recognize that you were using this ratio from the 2015 International Traffic Engineers Manual, and so this idea of 0.62 trips, 0.5 and peak hour generation, and then 0.51 in the AM that's where that number came from. I get that.
Exactly, yeah.
So I understand kind of how you calculated the numbers. My thought, though, is that at least my experience here in Bothell, and I know traffic is a very sensitive issue with all of us, which is it's almost more the peak half hour. It's not even the peak hour. It's the peak 20 minutes. You know, I mean, you can go through downtown at 8:30 or 9 in the morning. There's hardly any traffic going through the side streets. You go there from 7:15 to 7:45, and it's backed up. The other thing too is that 225 trips. That's a lot. That's a lot for an hour. That's my gut feeling, and especially if we're looking at, like I said, not an hour, but a more concentrated amount of cars in a half hour. And you think about what each one of us faces when we're at a stop sign, and it's not 200 cars, but I mean, just 15 cars, 20 cars can have a huge emotional impact on us. So I just wanted to make that comment. Any thought about not just the peak hour analysis, but the peak half hour?
Well, unfortunately, the way that they are measured is by that peak hour.
Right.
And partly it's because today the problem is 8 to 8:30. Tomorrow the problem is 8:30 to 9. So it's like really tough to do that. And basically this is the standard that the International Transportation Engineers apply whenever they do these things. And that's
Right.
the standard where we're tasked with complying with.
Yeah. Just a couple other comments, then I'll yield the floor, and that is, there's in the our parcel in particular, there's a number of factors that are really driving it. The potential increased density in housing that we're discussing, the Shelton View Elementary School that is driving traffic in and out, potential new retail services, which is good for I think our city and for those neighbors, but also could attract more traffic to them. And then the fact that really our Meridian and 228th both function as an arterial, folks trying to get from here to there. So I just wanted to kind of make that comment that from my standpoint, whatever we do here, and whatever kind of development that may result in increased traffic, I'm going to want to see engineering and a funding plan for really widening the roads and doing the improvements on especially Meridian, which would be directly impacted by anything that we do. Thanks.
You bet.
Yeah, so I want to make sure that I understand the basics here, particularly as it results for the MC Coast property. So as I see it, if we did nothing, currently this is private property held by MC Coast. They've paid for it, they've bought it, they've paid their taxes and things, and if we did absolutely nothing, it's R96 already, they could come in, they could build it out as R9600, cut down the trees, etc. We're looking at then our 4,000 with clustering, but we don't have that option right now from the BMC. And so one option here is, okay, well, can we get that option so that we can do the zoning that's better than what we have today? And then, a third option would be, there was clearly a lot of testimony last time about, can this be made into an open space? Can this be made into a park? I mean, it's not a park right now, but can that happen? And so that I want to drill into more of what path that would take. Like, I saw there was some good Q&A. I saw that there was an attempt to sell it to explore selling it to the city a few years ago. The city wasn't interested. We had some open questions about, well, how much is it worth? We never really came up with a number there. I realize that's kind of a tricky thing to calculate, but I do want to figure out what that third option would be, just even a bounding box.
Well, that's one of the more complex items that the city gets into, is acquiring properties, and there are so many different options. Usually what that happens, that's under the purview of the the Parks Department. Sorry, they're not the Public Works Department, they're the Planet Parks Department now, and John Keats. And Mr. Keats is already exploring the concepts of purchasing the DNR parcel. That's something that we've had in our plan to do, and so that's really recognized as something that we should explore. Right now, the MC Coast property is not identified as one of the parcels to purchase. That can change easily, and that's one of those things where, there could be a groundswell, and you've got a lot of people here at a groundswell where they come up with the money themselves or help the city with some application processes. There's a whole bunch of options there that we can literally explore, and so that's something that, I'm kind of taxed with looking at the worst case scenario. If that does not happen, what's the next option? And that's kind of what I'm presenting to you as far as a clustering provision. Certainly, there's all that discussion that would occur if we were going to look at acquisition of the property, and the city was going to look at acquisition of property, and that's something that the council would have a discussion about, the Parks Board would have a discussion about. So there's a whole layer there that we can go with as well. Certainly the Planning Commission's input would be valuable to have on that kind of a discussion point. I think that you guys would have a really good opportunity to provide a recommendation as to what you think should happen on that piece of property.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I think it's important to keep that larger context, because we attack one piece of the puzzle here, and we have a lot of other things in motion to be aware of. At this point, we've obviously got a lot of folks who came down. I'd love to get that testimony. Where is, I guess they come here to the podium.
Yeah, they'll come right here,
on
and
the other side this time.
I'll sit there, and we'll have the 3-minute time frame, and there's 3 little lights in front of Commissioner Stahl right there. And basically the idea is that if it's green, keep going. If it's yellow, wrap up. If it's red, really wrap up. But anyway, so I'll sit there and we'll just go for that project. Thank you.
Yeah,
And just,
We're having a slight technical problem. Can we take like a 3-minute break?
oh, I'm sorry. We are having some technical issues, so we're going to take a 3-minute break right now. No problem. Thank you. Sorry, folks.